The desert night was heavy, the air thick with secrets. A young woman stood alone on a balcony, her silhouette sharp against the moon's pale glow. Her breath trembled. "They're coming for me," she thought. Her heart raced, a drumbeat of defiance and dread. She was no ordinary woman, born into a world of gold and power. She carried a name that opened doors and sealed fates. But tonight, her name was a chain. She clutched a folded letter, its edges worn from her fingers, tracing the words of the one she loved. "We'll escape," it promised. "We'll be free." Footsteps echoed below. Too close. She slipped inside, her bare feet silent on cool marble. The palace was a labyrinth of opulence and shadows, its walls whispering betrayal. She moved like a ghost, her dark hair hidden beneath a borrowed scarf. Every creak of the floorboards was a warning, every flicker of lamplight a threat. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not running. Her story began months ago, in a city far from the desert's grip, a place where music spilled into the streets, where she could breathe without eyes on her every move. She was sent there to learn, to become the polished jewel her family demanded. But she found something else, him. He was no prince. No one her family would ever prove. His eyes held fire, his voice a melody that drowned out the rules she'd always known. They met in secret, under cedar trees and starlit skies, stealing moments that felt like rebellion, a dance in a crowded market, a whispered promise by the sea. "I'll follow you anywhere," he'd said. She believed him. But secrets don't stay buried in a world ruled by tradition. Whispers reached the palace. Her family's honor, they said, was at stake. She was summoned back, her freedom clipped like a bird's wings. He followed, reckless and unafraid, believing love could outrun fate. They were wrong. Now, in the palace, she paused at a mirror. Her reflection was a stranger, pale, eyes wide with fear. She adjusted the scarf, tucking away her identity. She planned this for weeks. A disguise, a stolen ticket, a chance to vanish. The plan was simple. Slip out at dawn, meet him at the edge of the city, and disappear before anyone noticed. She'd even staged a deception, a pile of clothes left by the shore, a rumor of drowning to throw them off her trail. But the palace had eyes, always watching. She crept down a servant's staircase, her pulse hammering. The air grew warmer, the scent of jasmine fading into dust. She was almost there, almost free, when a hand grabbed her wrist. "Where are you going?" a voice hissed. Her cousin, loyal to the family's iron code. His grip was a vice, his eyes cold. "Let me go," she whispered, but her voice shook. "You shame us," he spat. "You think you can run?" She twisted free, stumbling into the courtyard. The night was no longer her ally. Torches flared, casting jagged shadows. Men in dark robes appeared, their faces unreadable. Her lover was there too, dragged from the shadows, his hands bound. His eyes met hers, defiant even now. "Don't say anything," he mouthed. But she couldn't stay silent, not when they hauled her before the elders, their voices dripping with judgment, not when they demanded she renounce him, not when they spoke of honor, of duty, of a name she no longer wanted. "I love him," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. The room fell silent. Her words were a spark in a room of gunpowder. They locked her in a chamber, the walls closing in like a tomb. She heard him shouting her name, his voice growing fainter as they dragged him away. Hours bled into days. She scratched messages into the stone with a stolen hairpin, promises she'd never keep. "We'll find a way." They brought her to a room of stone and shadow where men in robes sat like vultures. They asked her to confess, to admit her sin. Her family pleaded with her to lie, to say she'd never see him again. But she saw his face in her mind, his smile, his courage, and she couldn't betray him. "I am guilty," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. She said it again, and again, for times as the law demanded. Each word was a defiance, a refusal to bend. The elders' faces hardened. Her fate was sealed. The sun was merciless on the day it happened. They took her to a place that wasn't a square of justice, but a forgotten corner of the city, a patch of cracked earth near a looming building. No crowds gathered. No official executioner stood ready. This was no trial, no law. This was vengeance. She was blindfolded, the cloth rough against her skin. They forced her to her knees, the ground biting into her flesh. She heard his voice, hoarse and desperate, calling her name. She wanted to answer, but her throat was tight with fear and love. "Do you have any last words?" a man asked, his voice cold as the desert night. She lifted her chin, though no one could see her eyes. "I regret nothing," she whispered. A gunshot shattered the silence. Her body crumpled, a marionette with cut strings. He screamed, a sound that tore through the air, but was too late. They made him watch, his heart breaking with every second. Then they turned on him. A blade gleamed in the sunlight. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick. 5 blows, each one a thunderclap of cruelty. His body fell beside hers, their blood mingling in the dust. But the story didn't end there. A man stood in the shadows, unnoticed by the executioners. A foreigner, a worker with a camera hidden in his coat. He'd seen it all, the princess, the lover, the brutal end. His hands shook as he slipped away, the weight of what he'd witnessed heavier than the film in his pocket. He sent the photos to a newspaper far away, where they landed like a bomb. The world roared with outrage. A film was made, a dramatized echo of her story, piecing together whispers and half-truths. It painted her as a rebel, a tragic heroine who died for love. It painted her family as monsters, guarding their power with blood. The palace fought back. They called it lies, a smear on their honor. They pressured governments, silenced networks, threatened trade. But the story wouldn't die. It spread like wildfire, carried by those who saw her not as a criminal, but as a symbol, a young woman who dared to choose her own path. Years later, the photos resurfaced. Grainy, haunting, undeniable. They showed her final moments, her lover's agony. But there was something else, a detail no one noticed at first. In the corner of one image, a figure stood apart from the others. A man, his face obscured, holding something small and metallic. A recorder. Rumors began to swirl. Had someone captured her last words? Her lover's cries? Was there a tape, hidden somewhere, that held the truth? Not the official story, not the dramatized film, but the raw, unfiltered reality of that day? The palace denied it. The filmmaker claimed he'd never heard of such a tape. But whispers persisted, passed from one stranger to another in darkened rooms. A journalist, obsessed with her story, followed the trail. He found the worker who'd taken the photos, now old and haunted, living in a city far from the desert. "I saw him," the worker said, his voice trembling. A man with a recorder. He was there, watching. He knew what was coming. The journalist pressed him. "Where's the tape?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know, but someone does."